Neelan, can you confirm that we are now live?
Yeah, we're live.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, welcome all the Emerging Tech Festival 2021 goers. I welcome you to this session that is going to look and discuss the markets surrounding our digital infrastructure sectors. And this is such a critical area of UK expertise, as well as a sort of an international playing field of opportunity. Digital infrastructure is underpinning a lot of markets that are enabling emerging technology to really get pushed to the fore. My name is Bruce McClelland. I work for KTN, and I'm sure that many of you are beginning to realize that the KTN here is a vast network, an outreach to make deep impact connections and to utilize the staff here, their deep expertise, in order to make those connections work for you. I'm not going to talk too much about it now because come and join us at any time you like, especially in the mornings and afternoons and evenings, into our booth that we've got going, which is good. Now, this is an interactive session. Please be encouraged to use the chat room to seek clarification questions from the speakers that I'm just about to introduce to you. I would encourage the chat room for also any wider discussion points that you'd like tabled. We will be monitoring it. The questions will be looked at after our speakers have presented, and I will tell you when that's going to be. But as I've been mentioning speakers, who have we got? We've got Brian Bishop, the CEO of Data Performance Consultancy. I have also got Steve Davey. He's the head of technical standards at Highways England, and that becomes extremely relevant later on, as you will soon find out, for some of the Welsh programs that are underway. I've also got Adrian Gould, who's the digital leader at Arup, and I also have the head of digital at Cero, Matt Kane. So can I please encourage to the stage Brian Bishop to come and give us an overview on what of the digital platforms that are underway, especially with digital twinning, and I'll ask you to unmute yourself, please, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Firstly, let me introduce myself. As I say, my name is Brian Bishop. I'm Chief Executive of Data Performance Consultancy Limited. We are smart city consultants based in the northwest of England in Liverpool. We also sit on UKRI's panel of experts for smart cities, and I have had the pleasure of working with Bruce in developing global missions in South Korea, looking at how the UK can work with other countries in the smart city space. Now, what I'll do now is just share my screen. Okay. Before I do that, actually, if you don't mind, I'll just come out and, in fact, no, I won't. Okay, so how can we deliver this? Well, in our opinion, we need to look at a triple helix approach where we connect up the ecosystem. We need to look at ways in which we can connect the public sector with the private sector and with academia. And the way to do this, in our opinion, is to develop a civic data trust model or cooperative, which allows us to connect up the four enterprise layers of business, data, infrastructure, and architecture. So if we look at business architecture per se, what we mean by that is, what is a city's strategic vision? What are the challenges that they face? What policies and processes that they need to deliver in order to create a much more vibrant community? And the way to do this is obviously to understand what their data needs are, how to create an information management framework. These areas are consistent across most cities in the UK and globally. If you want to think of this as being smart, one of the acronyms that we use within SMART is to think about S as being the strategy, M, the management. So how, in terms of management, how we look at standards-based approaches. A, being the assets. So what assets do you already have? What legacy systems, what infrastructure do you already have? There's no need to reinvent the wheel if you already have existing assets there. R is to look at the research. So again, how do we connect with our university partners to develop the modules for future learning, and to also think about what exists today and what is potentially coming out in the future. And that leads us then to how we can deliver the technology components for a potential smart city space. We then move on to the data, and this is the most important area. A lot of thought has gone into how we can develop the new data models for the future, how we can work with academia in terms of new data science techniques, predictive modeling, artificial intelligence, the use of blockchain technologies. But also what we need to understand is how that data can then feed into the business architecture layer. So how can we validate, key performance indicators such as job creation or the delivery of carbon emission reduction, leading to a net zero city. This requires, ontologies, common data models, and we are aware now that a lot of cities are really starting to work towards, the development of new standards in these areas. The data feeds the information. So unless we know what, from the business architecture level, what that information is, we can't validate the data that is going into that information framework. And what we don't want to do is develop these data lakes where data is just pushed into an environment, and then we're trying to search ways in which we can use that data to create information. It's more important to understand what it is we're trying to drive. So again, if it's economic wealth, creation of new jobs, how are we validating that data? Can we use things like HMRC data, PAYE data to validate that a job has been created? We need to understand where that job has been created, making sure that it's not a transitional job from one place to another, because that's not the creation of a job, it's just the movement of a job. It may create social value, but it's a different metric. So understanding how we can deliver a succinct data model, allows us then to understand how we can then feed that into our infrastructure. What infrastructure requirements do we then need? We've got the onset of things like 5G, and whilst I have opinions about 5G, we need to work out how we can make 4G and 3G work. But we've got things like satellite innovation. We've got other areas of telco, such as LoRaWAN. We've got other components such as Thread. These things all need to, again, fit into a standards-based approach. And we need to try and find out how, from a cost perspective, which is the most useful for the data requirements that we need. We've mentioned also again about standards. There are huge amounts of work going on, not just here in the UK, but also internationally on the development of new standards. But adopting standards also means good collaboration. What we don't want to see is that these standards are being driven by the large corporates, because that potentially could create lock-in. And that is not conducive to a good community-focused connected city environment. Our role as DPC is to look at ways in which we can design these open collaborative frameworks where we work with the private sector, the third sector, and with academia to make sure that how we open this up delivers the social value, social impact that we want to be able to create. So these three linkages here allows us then to feed this out into the wider markets of the application layer. The applications can be hardware, it can be software, but if you are pushing out, this type of model to SMEs and explaining to them why you require a specific data model to be used within their application layers, what it does is then develops this consistency. The consistency around the reference data libraries, the creation of a digital commons agenda, and provides visualization to the business layer and from the data layers that you can then build a learning cycle. This is more important when it comes to procurement. So during procurement phases, you can start to put into specifications, how you want to open up data. And as an example, I would like to refer to a project that we were involved in at the beginning post-COVID, which was looking at Bridgend and the development of a district heating network. And the project itself was obviously to look at ways in which we can reduce carbon emissions, how we can reduce things like fuel poverty, provision of heat through a natural source, which is heated water in collieries. This facilitated then other opportunities to develop STEM pathways for academia, to develop new business models for entrepreneurs to feed into this district heating network scheme. Now, as we've done in the past, these were siloed projects, but now what we have is an ability through procurement is to develop using this model of this 4 enterprise layers architecture to design the information governance pathways for the flow of data between the ecosystem. Whether that is from a SME provisioning of data around what the efficiency is of the heating system in a home, to thinking about actually what is a home, what is involved in understanding who is involved in a home, a household, etc., what assets are involved in the home. This all feeds into, again, the digital twin agenda. And the Centre for Digital Build Britain is carrying out some fantastic work in designing the standards and the data models that will be required for everybody to be able to use, and allow then the creation of this information management framework. So that cities, all communities, across Wales, across England, Scotland, and potentially globally, an ability to develop the right type of information that looks at the data for things like carbon emission efficiency, looking at reliability of assets such as pumps, such as piping networks, the development of the IoT components of a district heating network, but just as importantly, how that data is then transferred from the source, through the edge into a cloud environment, creating the security protocols behind it and the information governance pathways as well. So again, that involves things like information consent agreements, it involves numerous other aspects of data sharing techniques. And from our perspective, that involves a huge amount of barriers in terms of stakeholder engagement. It involves huge understanding of what is the perception of information. So as a business, what we've been doing over these last couple of years is working with the likes of Liverpool, Manchester, and more recently with MHCLG in helping organizations to define these data models, to feed into a consistent information management framework, but to connect the ecosystem up. So the systems that we've built is around a procurement model for connected businesses, connected people, and in doing so, that allows us then to map out the flow of data across that ecosystem. What we're looking for is to work with, cities, to design, and build this collaborative model. We're hoping to create a digital twin exemplar, working with the Centre for Digital Build Britain, and our request is to look at cities who want to be innovative, who want to develop SME supply chains in this space, because we believe then that creates a global opportunity, in terms of digital twins. I think what you will see from the presentations that you will see after myself is how these layers can work within those particular projects, and how those projects can define how you develop the architecture for the future, and how that architecture can connect one city to another, creating the blueprint for these digital twins. Hopefully that will give you a base in which to think about how you look at projects going forward. A project needs to now become more open in terms of its data flow. That will involve procurement teams having a better understanding of how to design these models in terms of data. And I'll just quickly give you a small introduction to that in terms of geospatial data. Looking at location, what is location? Is it a street? So you can use USRNs, unique street reference numbers, property, UPRNs, or you can start to look at things like my 3 words. The most important thing is to create that consistency across your strategy, across the way you work with other cities, so that the information then can feed into this trusted analytical environment where researchers can holistically view that data to develop better outcomes. So that's what we do as a business. This is the foundational model that we are building our systems around. And I think what you'll see as these other presentations come along is how this is then applied to their models. Thank you.
Many thanks, Brian. As you exit stage by muting and stop screen sharing and stopping your video, I'll just say that a good key message there around the ability of SMEs within cities having access to such platforms to develop their own innovative agenda for city solutions. Now, it turns out that just because it says Highways England, it's not necessarily about England. In fact, Steve Davies is going to tell us about national and potentially international impact programs around Highways England. So Steve, welcome to the stage, and share. I'm going to wander off, so you have the floor.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Brian, for that introduction and what we was doing. Particularly, I'm going to talk about what we're doing in terms of roads. And as Bruce said, although the title of the company I work for is Highways England, and we work as a government-owned company in England, actually my remit covers the whole of the United Kingdom. And so this is very relevant to Wales as well. So what I was going to talk about today is about what we've been doing for the last 5 years, particularly about digitizing our standards and a digital design and construction future for roads. So I'm going to look at a bit about our digital future, where we're going, what we are doing now, a bit of detail about a technical standards enterprise system, and future development work that we're now planning. Now I'm going to talk about 2 particular, what are currently deemed as document sets, but it's really a set of requirements. There's the Design Manual Roads and Bridges, which is commonly known as the DMRB, that sets out the design requirements for the design of road schemes, including maintenance activities throughout the United Kingdom motorway and all-purpose trunk road network, and then a separate, currently deemed as a document set, manual of contract documents for highway works, which includes the actual specification requirements, so product requirements, construction standards, workmanship and things like that. And again, that applies throughout the United Kingdom. And it would be remiss of me to miss out crediting the Welsh Government for their participation in this and the big contribution that they make along with the other devolved administrations to this work. It is really a joint exercise to write and keep these standards up to date. And probably the nearest equivalent of these documents, which people may be familiar with, is the building regulations. And that's the way in which they're treated, although they're enforced under contract rather than by pure regulation, but they have a similar status when we deal with coroners' courts and things like that. Over time, the DMRB and the MCHW would become out of date. The DMRB on average in 2015 was 15 years old, and the authoring and governance system that we had at that time was very cumbersome, and that led to people needing to contribute advice to schemes rather than updating the standards. And as the regulations got further out of date and there was giving more advice, that even led to even more becoming out of date. And we ended up issuing lots of departures from standards. These are formal departures from us as the client organisations, and a lot of those were just to bring in what it was current practice to be allowed to be used on that contract. In 2015, we commenced a 5-year programme to update the DMRB. Now, under the old governance and processes and authoring arrangements, which involved word processor documents being passed around by emails, comments coming back by track changes, word tables, Excel sheets, any other form that you can think of, we would have taken 12 years to do that. And we had got a 5-year target from government. So it was needed radical new processes, changing the technology we used. We completed that in April 2020, and we're now commencing a similar process for the MCHW. What we did was took the concept that design requirements and the construction specifications are not that different in the purpose and application to software code. In fact, it set out a very structured set of requirements, which at the moment were being interpreted by humans, but we can foresee a world when they would be more interpreted by machines in the future. So we looked at Agile, Scrum, and other ways of developing good code and transferred those into the methods in which we write good design and construction requirements. And the technology we've developed and continuing to develop is world leading. There's nothing like this in the standards world at present anywhere in the world, and we're getting a lot of interest about sharing this, and it is built on open source technology, both for contractual type standards like these and formal standards written by organizations internationally. So if we move on to, this is our digital future vision. Now, mainly I'm going to be talking about that top box, which is our open cloud-based platform called the Technical Standards Enterprise System, containing our digital design and specification standards. That connects through and will do directly into design software. We have something in Highways England at the moment, which is being shared around, called Rapid Engineering Modelling. And that is an automated design process. We can take in geographical information layers, other bits of information about science and scientific interest, anything we want that type of geographical information into there, alongside our design rules, and it will come out with what is the best option for smart motorways, say, or where we would position gantries, where we'd position the emergency refuge areas, and all of that is related to the difficulties of construction or hazards. And that takes around 2 hours of something that used to take probably 4 or 5 months to do that option manually. And we can run multiple options around that. We're also developing a digital product catalog, and that goes into the formal design, which is created in human-aided design software, and links to the quantity estimating tools through to the construction phase with the connected and automated sites, the as-built models, which we are working with Centre for Digitally Built Britain as well on that to create digital twin assets on which helps us with the operation and maintenance and customer values. So although I talk about the technology a lot in this presentation, and it is very vital, what we needed to do to assist the machine readability design and construction rules is we needed to simplify the language that authors used, and enforce that rules through software. And this is one example, the verb forms that we use. There is one requirement or one piece of advice in each clause, and it is indicated by the relevant verb indicated on the screen. And previously, the reading ease of the DMRB was post PhD level, yet most of our designers are graduate levels, and therefore we needed to simplify the language both for the human approach but also to make it more structured for machines to read. Now, so what has been achieved, before I go on to say what we've done, is the fact that we've reduced the number of documents from 394 to 160, reduced it from approximately 15,000 pages to 8,000 pages, and reduced the ambiguity. And it's now digitized, authored, reviewed, and it's been published, and it's almost machine readable. And I'll come on to why we call it almost machine readable at the moment. And these are some of the benefits of which we've delivered, and there's some more on here, all of which are very vital to generate the business case for the work that we're doing. One of the biggest ones I should highlight on there is that 60% reduction in departures, because we've removed the inconsistencies, we've brought it up to date, and that in itself has something like a £14 million benefit most years to us as one organisation just in England. It's bigger than that elsewhere. Moving on, how we use this technology to achieve this. What we've done is built two, well, in this case, this is the first system that we built. And the main part of that was the collaborative authoring and review system called CARS. It's a web application that allows people to collaboratively author and review standards. Now, there is other collaborative authoring software out there, but what this is doing is writing structured documents. There is the ability to check the drafting rules against what is written in each clause and warn the author where something is incorrect against the drafting rules that we've set. It provides the full audit trail and the change log, background commentary, which includes the reasons why we've included that particular requirement in the standard. And it does the reviewing online as well. So it's all within one system. And we're using a commercial piece of software called Jira, and that's an agile project management workflow system we buy off the shelf, but it's connected into CARS so that people can monitor and where we are within the programs of updating these various documents. And originally we output that into a published copy, even though within CARS the information is stored within a database and then renders a PDF copy. But But moving on from that, we've now expanded this considerably to what is now shown on the screen as the Technical Standards Enterprise System in its full regime. So CARS then publishes revisions into a digital library, which we host in the cloud, and I said it's stored in a database format there. That's controlled by an index manager. Versioning to us is very, very important to know which version of the standards or each individual clause is used in which design. And at present, that goes out through a publications API, mainly as a PDF to website, as we hone, so people can search through that. And we've also included an update to the departure approval system. So everything you see in blue there is operational and has been for a number of years. But we're now moving on to what is in the orange boxes on there. It sometimes renders a brown on some people's screens and other colors, but the most exciting one of those potentially is the TSCS API, and that's where we're going to expose the digital clauses for use directly in design software, and that will be available to all vendors of this type of software. We have run various proofs of concepts, both with the rapid engineering model that I mentioned previously and the commercial design package. And at the moment, we're looking in the next 12 months to productize that to make it available for everybody. So we've proved the concept. We know what we need to do. It's just a matter of delivering that now. And there is a business need for that as well. There's also the standards compliance integration, where we'll be actually looking to see whether people have used the correct standards, and I'll come back onto that a bit about an analytics hubs to look at where usage are, so we can improve the feedback to update the DMRB. And this year we're just about to start on an update of the MCHW, so the specification will become part of this system by 2024. And this is the road that we foresee to the digital future, looking at data-driven optioneering, automated departure applications. Now, when we did the open API or the discussion, the proof of concepts, one of those design softwares was already getting ready to export most of the information that was required directly into our departure application system. So we're there, we know what data needs to be transferred, we know what the formats are, there's some work to do there. The next stage is the digital evidence trail. At the moment, we rely on a lot of paper records, and unfortunately, when there is an incident on the network, we quite often get asked by the police or the coroner's courts about what design or construction decisions were made and what standards were used to implement that particular scheme. And we need that as a digital evidence trail, and also in terms of products, to make sure that we've got that golden thread of information all the way back to the source. And we're working with, particularly at the moment, with structural steels, and the accreditation body for UK constructional steels, CARES, is developing a cloud-based system which we will be looking to use to go right back to the mill in which that steel was first produced. An optimization of designs and a responsive design and construction ecosystem. Now, the final bit that I'm going to talk about is around compliance checking. We've been working with a group called DCOM, Digital Compliance. Originally started out under a project from Centre for Digitally Built Britain, now funded by Infrastructure UK. And this is looking at developing a compliance checking system for all regulations, requirements and standards, where they're created in an author environment, available in a digitized form as shown in the top of this diagram. And this system can check against the human-aided design environment, the model, the digital twins, and compare the results and analytics and agree for whether that's correct or not. So this can apply to building control, it can apply to our environment as well within roads, And actually, we're working with Cardiff University a lot on this. A lot of this area of work, a lot of the expertise is held within Cardiff University, and that's where a lot of this from the academic world is coming forward, but with lots of helps, including from Matt at Cero, who'll be on later talking to you. So that's all I've got to talk about. So thank you. Back to you, Bruce.
Hey, thanks, Steve. If you shut your video down, and I'd just like to thank the audience. We're seeing some questions coming in via the chat. Neelam is there on the button to make sure that those questions get tabled, which will be shortly after the speakers. So I'd like to introduce Adrian Gould. It turns out that the world of digital infrastructure is interesting, but then you start developing digital tools for a digital world. So Adrian, tell us a little bit about those wider programs at Arup, but I'm sure there's other things to talk about as well. So over to you, Adrian.
Thank you. So I'll share my screen. So my name's Adrian Gould. I lead the digital in the west side of Arup, built environment company. My background isn't actually built environment. I come from telecoms. So I spent the last 20 plus years in telecoms, working on standard platforms like Android and things like that. So very much from a standards background, but I'm not going to be talking about standards here. Actually, it's going to be a little bit more sort of engaging in the fact that we're going to show you some demos and things like that of what we've built in Arup around stakeholder engagement, because it's good that we are building lots of infrastructure projects, and but over the last year, a lot of them have sort of struggled because they have to go through a legal situation where they have to engage the public, they have to go through public consultation, and it is a requirement, it's a legal requirement to take these things through. So what we've been working, actually we did it 2 or 3 years ago, we built the first one, but over the last year or so, we have now brought together an experience where we can, let me just go and there. So use a digital solution to communicate to basically anyone and everyone that has a computer or a mobile phone around an infrastructure project. So that, and actually we're taking it further than infrastructure, and I'll show you an example in a second. Because it is all very well that we are throwing a lot of projects out into the world, but actually we do need normal people to engage, whether they're projects that are maybe changing how their city runs, whether it's a social thing, whether it's an environmental thing, whether it's a big piece of road. People need to engage with this, and within COVID situation they couldn't. So what we've done is we've built, and I'm just going to show you some examples because it's the absolute best way to do it. So a fully digital experience. We are fully compliant to things like, and you can see here is the Highways England one, privacy notices, cookie policies, all of the standard internet stuff that you have to do, because we also collect feedback during these things. So we have to be GDPR compliant. So effectively, you can see the situation where we're coming in and we explain the proposition and explain what the project is going to communicate. We also have, and this is very important again from a standards thing, is accessibility. So there are a huge amount of people out there that interact with digital solutions that cannot use a mouse because of various problems, or have sight problems or hearing problems, and they've got to be included. And there are a set of standards, accessibility standards, WCAG standards, where digital solutions have to be usable by people who can't engage necessarily with standard mouse and things. So this solution is fully compliant there. So you use things like tab and escape to move around the room. But what I'm going to show you is just this live room. So this is a room that we built for Highways England. And the whole concept of this is you literally move left and right, and you open up content. So here's a little video that they put in there, and opens, plays, does everything. But everything you have here is in the room. So we don't jump out to different tabs. We don't jump out of the room. You can engage with various things here, you know, PDFs and all the other stuff. But it also goes down to much deeper level. So we can have geospatial interaction. So here you can interact with things like geospatial maps that we've built for the project. And one of the key things here is then you can go into the next level of technology where you're now in an augmented reality VR type setup. So if you've got Google goggles or anything, Google Cardboard, that looks normal. Obviously it looks a bit weird now. So the whole thing of this virtual engaged platform is to bring together as many different forms of content and interaction that you want to do, and allow normal people to look at it in their own home. So we've done a number. So here's one, actually, if you can read Welsh, because this is the Welsh link to the tech festing. If you can read Welsh, this one was for a big reservoir project in Wales. Similar situation, you can see. But all of these things are fully customizable. And that's the thing that we've done. And we have situations, we have things where here, this is actually done for Welsh Water. So we have a nice classroom here built for students, which we can change languages, we can change grades, we can put it in English and Welsh. And the thing here is for kids in Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 to be able to move around, and we can interconnect different experiences. So children can move around and they can learn about water usage, how to make a tap, all the things are here, the quizzes, and it's all built on the same platform where we are hooking together using a very standards approach, different technologies to allow people to actually interact with content. We can get feedback as well. So this is where we are using a pluggable solution from a third party. So you can do live chat here. So you can chat like you would in a normal situation, with your telecoms provider. And then these people here, and then someone can respond. So we have all of this in there. There we go. That's the agent supporting. And it's really, really important because we can share things that are complex. I'm just going to move the thing off my screen. Complex models. So we have in infrastructure and in construction, we build a lot of stuff, whether it's digital twins, whether it's a BIM model of something. And we want normal people to actually see and experience this stuff. But just how to get them to find it and use it is really important and key. So this is just how we can embed things like some of these augmented reality. If you were looking at this on a mobile, this then appears on your table in your lounge or whatever, and you can actually walk around it and you can look in and interact with the model. And again, that's really important if you are implementing a bridge or a highway or something like that. Into people where it's going to actually impact them. You want them to understand what you're doing, and it not just to be an engineer to an engineer thing. So finally, I just want to show a little bit about the data, which is really important, the data and analytics we get from these things. So you can see here, an average run, this is a run that we sent yesterday for highways actually. So we can get 8,000 to 10,000 people visiting each public consultation digitally. We get all of the detail around the demographics. And that's really important, is these things need to be viewable by not just young tech savvy people. So you can see here that we're seeing very much 13%, and we've had over 100,000 people visit the rooms, 100,000 people. So we're getting 13% of them are over 65, gender balance, how people are accessing. So this is really important. So you can see actually here about 70% of people are accessing from a mobile and a tablet. So all of that stuff's really key about engaging people with projects that we're driving from a built environment perspective. So that's probably all I want to show really. I think I'll come back. We've done loads of clients and loads of projects. So I think that's probably it. And hopefully I've caught up a little bit of time there as well, Bruce. So
that's very kind of you, Adrian. Thank you very much indeed. A quick catch up there was helpful. I would like Matt, if you could come to a stage. There you are, and you're head of digital and head of platforms as well. So tell us about the CERO program underway.
Sure,
and how that...
Yeah. Thanks very much, Bruce. Good presentation so far. So yeah, I'm Matt Kane. I'm the head of digital at CERO. We're a Welsh-based SME, and we operate primarily in the building industry, but also building and energy management. So very ambitious. We've got 4 sort of primary business units. Right? We're actually a zero carbon property developer. So we have our own estate of 35 zero carbon homes that we're building just north of Swansea in a place called Park Hadai. We're also a renewable technology project management company. So we have a project management team that work with a lot of partner developers to sort of take the implementation of renewable technology all the way from the specification through to the actual implementation, and working with the subcontractors on site. The 2 key bits that I really want to sort of drill into today, and this relates primarily to the data, is that we're an energy service provider and optimizer under CERO Energy. What that means is effectively we help manage the optimal use of energy within residents' homes. So if you're a CERO Energy customer, We have renewable tech implemented in the home. We have intelligent energy systems that actually manage the manage data flows and manage the appliances. So we can turn heat pumps on, we can turn hot water tanks on, or charge the hot water tank, manage batteries, and we can manage EV chargers. The intent of that is that looking at energy pricing or energy carbon intensity, we can start to really optimize the profile of the resident. Very simple example, solar panels, battery means that we can start to charge that battery up during the peak of the solar or the irradiation period and discharge the battery to power the home between 4 and 8 p.m. That's a real basic sort of view. There's a lot more optimization that you can do with agile tariffs, with sort of peaks and troughs of carbon intensity. Very importantly, we also have an arm called Zero Life, which looks after the customer experience. Right? So that department is all about championing the customer experience in new builds. So in new technological homes where you have renewable tech, there's a sort of traditional shift, or there's a shift away from traditional heating systems, for example. So a lot of low temperature heating comes along with renewable technology, and how you interact with the home is subtly different when you've got low temperature underfloor heating. Things like charge times, you don't have the ability to boost the gas boiler and have heat across the radiators at 70 degrees or 60 odd degrees at within an hour. Underfloor heating has a gradual ramp up. So there's a huge journey to take customers on when we start to really implement renewable tech. Probably see from this, our entire sort of business model is all aimed at net zero in the UK housing stock. But I'll mention later, you can't overemphasize the importance of taking the customer on the journey towards net zero. It's not just about the homes. So what's my challenge today? My challenge is around standards. And Brian's already sort of alluded to it, as is Steve and Adrian just now. The amount of data that we actually need to optimize a home is huge. So if you think about a home from both its physical aspects, you've got building data around the site. So where is it? The structure, what's the sort of load bearing capability? The skin, what's it built of? Brick, what's the sort of fascia? Services, so all of the wiring, all of the components that make up the heating, hot water, etc. And then spaces, all the rooms within the home. And all of those attributes influence the sort of thermal capabilities of that home. But not only that, if we are managing the energy, there's another set of data that we need to gather. Oh, sorry, in fact, my slide hasn't moved on. Give me a second. There we go, apologies. We, as part of our services, we implement thermostats with temperature reads. So we've got CO2 sensors, humidity sensors, a lot of electrical submeters that are gathering data on a frequent basis. Right? So our submeters will collect every 15 minutes. So we get quite a granular view of energy usage. Aside from that, we're collecting data from external sources. So Octopus Agile Tariff data, for example, on carbon intensity, on pricing. We also have water flow rates around the underfloor and the hot water systems, and importantly, capacity of hot water tanks. All of that sort of is needed to feed into a real optimized home from an energy perspective, and also to be able to feed into other value propositions like demand side response. If you know your capacity of your hot water tank, you know how much it takes to charge that hot water tank up via an immersion or a heat pump. You can start to predict how much energy you can actually draw from the grid at times of oversupply. Very importantly as well, customer profile data. And I deliberately call this one out separately because we have a real GDPR focus on customer profile data. However, to understand how a home is actually performing from a thermal perspective, you need to understand the occupants, right? You need to understand what their schedules are. You need to understand what their sort of preferences are from a temperature perspective and a timing perspective. So this vast amount of data, exactly as Bruce had mentioned earlier on, right? It means we've got lots of data that is sort of structured, unstructured, relational, non-relational, that all needs to be integrated to build a picture of that home, both physical and performance-wise. And to that end, it's got to be discoverable, right? It's got to be accessible. And it's got to be interoperable. We've got distinct disciplines of data effectively that need to be sort of plugged together effectively. And modeling a home, if we want to get to the point now of actually truly simulating the impact of changes to a home, we've got to be able to pull all of that data together into a reliable model. Talking internally at the moment, but I'll talk on the next slide about exchanging that data externally. Where I'm getting to is that in today's environment, within buildings, within the wider arena, there's just a vast amount of data that we've got to start managing, and we have to start managing that in a really intelligent way. So data standards, the simplest tag at the moment is probably metadata, right? What do you call a temperature sensor? What do you tag the temperature itself within that temperature sensor's readings as? If we don't create the right sort of metadata that labels each of these data flows, then how do we start to integrate it? How do we start to talk to third parties if we're talking different languages? Very, very importantly, within any standards, right, change happens. You know, new sensors, new technologies will appear. So those standards have to be able to cater not just for today's requirements, but also for tomorrow's requirements and thereafter. And this is a real challenge for SMEs, right? It's making sure that we choose the right standards based on today's requirements, but also based on the future change capabilities. And to make that decision, it's tricky for SMEs because you've got a fair variety of standards that we could comply with. We tend to look for the most prolific in the areas today. So, for example, at Cero, we're favouring IFC as our sort of data stand or our data model. That's not to say it's the right answer for 10 years' time, but we have to choose something that is prolific enough today to make sure that there is a journey towards any migration to a future standard. But all of this is great, right? Internally, so long as you set up the right logical structures, you don't necessarily need to follow a standard to an extent, but it's absolutely imperative when we start to exchange that data. And the data we're collecting has far wider an impact now than just the business model or the business plan requirements. So if I nip to the next slide. We talk about two distinct areas for data exchange in our world, right? And Cero is extremely ethical. We want to make sure that the market that we're sort of creating is fair. The competitors could come in and take over one of our homes if there's a better model out there. You know, we want to be the market leader based on price and customer appeal, customer value, not based on lock-ins. So with that, if we don't get the right standards, then how do we exchange that data? How do we make sure that landlords, for example, understand whether they've got fuel poverty in certain areas? You know, are some homes running their temperatures at such a low set point because they're worried about their bills? How do we make sure that we're sharing that data with the DNOs to ensure that the grid is balanced effectively? You know, that we're pulling pushing energy at the right times based on supply and demand. How do we ensure that customers have the right environmental quality, and more importantly, that people have visibility of that environmental quality? Social landlords, building protection. You know, if a building is damp, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the residents, it's also bad for the building, right? We need to make sure that buildings are sustained so that they can provide that benefit for future generations. All of this comes down to the point that this data has to be exchanged in a way that is meaningful on both sides. And I'm not giving answers today, I'm giving some of the challenges with a couple of pointers. But the work that the likes of Bruce are doing on collaborative forums, to me, is absolutely imperative. And the ability to take SMEs on that journey to help define their architecture so that they are saving, you know, effectively saving money, saving rework potential in the future as you have to migrate from one standard to another. But I'd go as far as to say saving the planet. If we've got this amount of data and we can share it with the right third parties to get the right benefit of analysis, then we can just keep ensuring that our environments and our carbon emission profile is improved and enhanced year on year. Business-wise, we have all the standard sort of third-party sharing requirements, right? Service provision. If we want to use a different optimizer to manage the profile of the energy, we need to expose the right data sets. When we have landlords, so we work with a lot of registered social landlords because they have a big drive towards net zero that we're supporting. Well, they need an aggregated view. So they want to see what that carbon intensity of their estate is, not just, you know, individual homes, but they will want to drill down to individual homes to look back at some of those social responsibility areas. We need to be sharing with academia, right? Academia has some of the best research in the world. You know, we need to ensure that these organizations have access to the right data with the right security models and protection, right, to protect individuals, but they need to see that sort of profile so that they can work towards improvements in further standards and regulations. And importantly for us, simulation and modeling. We take customers on a journey of retrofitting for sort of carbon reduction and building performance improvements. And to do that, you need to be able to simulate what happens if we put cavity wall insulation in. What happens if we put vapor barriers in? Is that good for the building? Is it bad for this building? Good for the resident? And so forth. So lots of needs to share externally for social and business responsibilities. And they're not definitive lists, by the way. And the thing that concerns me when we look at standards is if you look at various industries, a little cartoon from XKCD, right? In this case, 14 competing standards. Sounds ridiculous. So do we create another standard? Maybe the right answer, but then we've got 15 competing standards. So really, the answer to this is ensuring that we have the right collaboration and that the standards that we design are actually fit for the purpose they're designed for. They can scale, but they don't necessarily all overlap. I mean, utopia would be, for me, would be one standard that covers building and performance data. That's not really going to happen. So we have to make a choice on, as I said earlier, on what's prolific today. But one other answer, aside from collaboration and accelerator programs, we should start looking at encouraging open source integration. I spent time working in the automotive industry, and there's a big industry based purely on integrating different metadata standards. We need to step away from that. That becomes a blocker, both financially and priority-wise. We need to be encouraging an industry that really is open to data sharing to make sure that we're improving the entire, from my perspective, UK housing stock's carbon emission and customer sort of comfort and quality of life perspective. So lots of challenges and as I say, forums, lots of collaboration. That's exactly what's needed to make sure that we're all starting to adopt, ideally, common standards, rationalized to the point of exact sort of compliance with purpose. Okay, I think I've taken exactly 10 minutes. That is the end for me. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Many thanks, Matt. Can I just quickly bring all the speakers to put their videos on and mic themselves? We have got 2 minutes. We have got some questions. So to that end, can I ask the speakers to be very concise and direct, even bullet point if necessary, on some of the responses, but I'm aware that some people are going to have to move off. So very quickly, we had a question in, it could be largely directed at Brian, around how he feels that the SMEs that would be engaging in this supply chain, how ready are they really for this digital and environment around infrastructure? And how easy would it be for them to start implementing? Very quickly, Brian.
Yeah, I think obviously it depends on resources. You've got large companies which use resources that are already going down this pathway. But if we want to develop new entrepreneurship and bring new SMEs into this ecosystem, we need to work together to develop co-creative models. And that, again, facilitates an ability for data sharing, looking at ways in which they can see the standards that they need to meet to build the applications that feed into this whole sort of enterprise layer.
And Steve, you were looking at SME engagement in the toolkits that you're providing, and this is an important piece, I understand.
Yeah, we do. And I think actually what we're doing here is opening up the ability for more tech industry to make use of our standards. At the moment, it's been a engineering specific one, which needed a lot of large companies to get involved. And through the TSS API work, we was actually working with a small, medium-sized company rather than one of the large ones as our demonstrator.
Cool. Adrian, this is very quick fire. Schools, what a great platform for them to engage with. How are you engaging with schools with it?
Yeah, so we started with Welsh Water. So Welsh Water are using that platform to go to all of the schools that they work with. That's the start. We have just focused on infrastructure and big projects like Highways England and Welsh Water and Environment Agency. But at the moment, yes, we are going to see how that goes because I think it's a good platform for schools. So, but we're not using, it's not for online learning. It's not that type of thing as in school subjects. But yeah, we'll see how it goes with Welsh Water.
Thank you. I'm going to go around all the panel here. I just want a very quick answer on 2 points. What do you think is the biggest UK opportunity on the rounded topic that we've got here? And what do you think is the biggest opportunity for the Indigenous SME innovator? Let me start off with Matt very quickly, those 2.
So the biggest challenge for the UK.
Well, the biggest opportunity for the UK.
from my point of view, very simply, the biggest opportunity is to get all of the UK housing stock connected in a reliable way with data being exchanged so that we can start to understand the true impact of measures of retrofits and occupant behaviour. We've got to make a huge difference to get to net zero. And
small
data
businesses?
is key.
Small business?
Small businesses. I think collaboration and accelerator programs are the real opportunity, right? As we've heard, the guidance and advice on selecting the right standards at the start of the journey is absolutely pivotal to make sure that the SMEs are starting off on the right foot and not losing valuable time in re-engineering.
Cool, thank you. Brian, UK opportunity.
Yeah, I think, you and I have been over to South Korea, and it was very clear that they looked at the UK as being, the exemplar for the development of new standards in this space. They have huge issues in terms of SME engagement because of the structure of the chaebols, the big companies, the Samsungs and what have you. And a lot of the young people are moving out of the region as a result because they're not getting those opportunities to be part of this digital revolution. So I think the UK can lead globally in this area of the development of open standards, and creation of an ability for SMEs to engage in this type of model.
Perfect, thank you very much. Steve, biggest UK opportunity?
Biggest UK opportunity is around design software, I think, for SMEs, in the fact that once we've got those open standards available, which are UK wide, is the innovative use of that standards to design new things so that engineers can concentrate on the more complex areas. At the moment, there is a number of standard design packages around that are used, but they are built by engineers for engineers to use, and there's a lot of replication. The other part of it is on the specification side is construction of roads is a hazardous activity, and we can remove a lot of the human interfaces from that if we can make the models available digitally so that it can go to that automated plant.
Many thanks. And then Adrian, can I lastly for yourself? You're in an interesting position. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll pick up probably the first one. So, I mean, it's really interesting for me coming from telecoms, where the world is standardized beyond belief. So any phone, any box, anything that's plugged into the network has to talk to everything else. And that is how telecoms has done what telecoms has done. I was astounded to come into the built environment where you enter a building and all of the different boxes don't talk to each other and they give out different data and different standards and different formats. That's a massive opportunity. If we got a building and all the components in the buildings and things like that, like Matt said, to actually communicate and properly exchange and talk to each other, and then we could do stuff with that, I think that's a huge opportunity.
And then how would Arab or someone like Arab pivot to the SME innovation agenda?
So it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, we're working a lot on all of that stuff anyway, with regards to with the built environment and the buildings and the interconnectivity of that stuff. The SME side is it's not really my area, so I'm going to leave that to the other people that are cleverer than me on that.
Look, I'm going to thank all our speakers. I'm sorry that we have run over time. So Adrian, Brian, Steve, and Matt, thank you very much for your input here. The KTN will be on their stand in the afternoon from 4 o'clock. I will be there, and I know all the slots. So if you've got a further question around that, or you would like to be introduced, I'm sure I can. That's what we do at KTN. We make those impacting connections, and that's what I'll be doing from 4 o'clock. Come and see me. Many thanks, everybody. Let's play out with that video. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you for joining the Emerging Tech Fest. Join us again on our virtual live sessions, or watch us on playback anytime, anywhere.
I think we're out there and muted. I'm muted.